Dr. Amelia Washington pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Community Center on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She had just finished visiting her 82-year-old mother at the nearby nursing home, and the smell of her mother's favorite lavender perfume still lingered on her casual clothes. Amelia wasn't dressed for business today. She wore comfortable jeans, worn sneakers, and a simple gray sweater that had seen better days. Her natural hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she carried a small purse instead of her usual leather briefcase. Most people wouldn't have guessed that this woman stepping out of a modest Honda Civic was one of the most successful civil rights attorneys in the country. They wouldn't know that she had graduated at the top of her class from Harvard Law School, or that she had won cases that changed lives across America. They certainly wouldn't know that she was the daughter of the late Reverend Charles Washington, a man who had marched alongside the greatest civil rights leaders of his generation. But that's exactly how Amelia preferred it. She had learned early in life that real change happened when you connected with people as a human being, not as a title or a bank account balance. Today's visit to the community center was supposed to be just that, a chance to see the place with her own eyes before making what could be a life-changing donation. The community center had reached out to her foundation 3 months ago. Their letter was heartfelt and detailed, explaining how they served over 300 families in one of the city's most underserved neighborhoods. They provided after-school programs for kids, job training for adults, and a food pantry that fed anyone who walked through their doors. The center's programs were exactly the kind of grassroots work that Amelia's foundation loved to support. What really caught her attention was their proposal for a new youth center. They wanted to create a safe space where teenagers could learn computer skills, get homework help, and participate in mentorship programs. The current building was too small and they needed funding to expand. The estimated cost was $2 million, a significant investment that required Amelia to see the operation firsthand. As she walked toward the building, Amelia noticed how well-maintained everything looked despite its age. The sidewalks were clean, the windows sparkled, and someone had planted colorful flowers along the walkway. She could hear children's laughter coming from somewhere behind the building, and it made her smile. This felt like a place where good things happened. The front desk was empty when she walked in, but she could hear voices coming from different directions. To her left, she saw what looked like a classroom where adults were working on computers. To her right, a group of elderly people sat around tables, some playing cards while others worked on puzzles. The walls were covered with children's artwork and thank you letters from families who had been helped by the center's programs. Amelia checked her watch. She was right on time for her 2:30 appointment with the center's director, Robert Mitchell. She had spoken with him twice on the phone, and he had sounded genuinely passionate about the work they were doing. She was looking forward to meeting him face-to-face and seeing the programs in action. After waiting a few minutes, she noticed a man in his mid-50s walking toward the front desk. He was well-dressed in a button-down shirt and tie, and his name tag identified him as the director. Perfect timing, Amelia thought. She stepped forward with a friendly smile, ready to introduce herself. But before she could say a word, the man looked her up and down with obvious disapproval. His eyes lingered on her casual clothes and worn sneakers. When his gaze met hers, there was no warmth, no welcome. Instead, there was something that made Amelia's stomach tighten with a familiar, unpleasant recognition. "Excuse me," the director said, his tone sharp and dismissive. "Are you here for the food distribution? Because that's not until Thursday and you'll need to sign up in advance." Amelia blinked, caught off guard. "Oh no, I'm not here for that. I have an appointment at 2:30 with the director." "I'm Amelia Washington." The man's expression didn't change. If anything, it became more skeptical. "An appointment? I don't think so. Look, lady, I don't know what kind of game you're trying to play, but we don't just hand out money here. If you need assistance, you follow the proper procedures like everyone else." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. In an instant, she understood what was happening. This man had looked at her, a black woman in casual clothes, and made an assumption. He had decided who she was and what she wanted before she had even spoken. It was a feeling she knew too well, despite her success and status. Prejudice didn't check your bank account or your diplomas before it struck. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Amelia said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "I'm Dr. Amelia Washington from the Washington Foundation. I scheduled this appointment 3 weeks ago to discuss a potential partnership with your center." But the director wasn't listening. His face was growing red and his voice was getting louder. Look, I don't have time for this nonsense. I don't care what kind of story you've made up or what fake business card you're about to pull out. You people always think you can walk in here and demand special treatment. Those two words, you people, hung in the air like a slap. Amelia felt her professional composure wavering for just a moment. She had faced discrimination in courtrooms, boardrooms, and fancy restaurants. She had been questioned, dismissed, and underestimated more times than she could count, but it never got easier. It never stopped hurting. Around them, the center was going quiet. The cheerful sounds of children and conversations were fading as people began to notice the confrontation at the front desk. Amelia could feel eyes turning toward them, could sense the uncomfortable tension spreading through the room like ripples in a pond. She reached into her purse and pulled out her business card, trying one more time to resolve this peacefully. Please just take a look at this. You can call my office to verify the appointment. I'm sure this is just a simple mix-up. The director glanced at the card but didn't really look at it. Instead, he let it flutter to the floor dismissively. Nice try, but any fool can get fake business cards printed. I've seen this scam before. You come in here dressed down, pretending to be someone important, hoping to get free services or maybe even cash donations from our legitimate donors. Amelia watched her business card land on the linoleum floor, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had ever been judged by their appearance, every individual who had been dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow expectations. This was about dignity and respect, basic human rights that shouldn't have to be earned through designer clothes or impressive titles. Sir, she said, her voice still calm but carrying a note of steel that her courtroom opponents would have recognized. I am asking you very respectfully to look at that card and make a simple phone call to verify my identity. That's all. But respect was clearly not on the director's agenda. His voice got even louder, drawing more stares from staff and visitors throughout the center. I said no. I don't have time to entertain every person who walks in here with some crazy story. Now I'm going to ask you one more time to leave. And if you don't, I'm calling security. The threat hung between them like a challenge. Amelia looked around the room and saw faces watching the confrontation with a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and recognition. Some of the staff members looked like they wanted to intervene but didn't know how. The visitors, many of whom were clearly people of color who used the center's services, watched with expressions that said they had been in similar situations themselves. This was supposed to have been a day of hope and possibility. Amelia had come here ready to write a check that would change lives and strengthen a community. Instead, she found herself standing in a place dedicated to helping people, being treated like a threat simply because of how she looked. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a community center that claimed to serve everyone equally, run by a man who couldn't see past his own prejudices. Here was a place that asked for donations to help fight inequality, led by someone who was perpetuating that very inequality with every word he spoke. As the director's voice continued to rise and more people stopped what they were doing to watch, Amelia realized that this moment was about to become something much bigger than either of them had expected. What happened next would be remembered long after the echoes of his angry words faded away. The tension in the community center lobby was thick enough to cut with a knife. Robert Mitchell, the director, was no longer just speaking loudly. He was practically shouting now, his face red with what looked like genuine anger. Amelia Washington stood her ground, but she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The cheerful community center had transformed into something that felt more like a courtroom, except she was being tried without any chance to present her case. I've dealt with people like you before, Mitchell continued, his voice echoing off the walls. You think you can walk in here looking like that? He gestured at her casual clothes with obvious disgust, and somehow convince us you're somebody important. Well, let me tell you something. Real professionals don't show up to business meetings dressed like they just rolled out of bed. The word stung more than Amelia wanted to admit. She thought about her morning, how she had deliberately chosen comfortable clothes because she planned to visit her mother afterward. Her elderly mother had been having a difficult week, and Amelia always made sure to spend extra time with her when she could. The idea that her choice to prioritize comfort and family time was now being used against her felt deeply personal. From across the lobby, she could see the computer class had stopped their lesson entirely. The instructor, A young woman who couldn't have been more than 25 looked mortified. The elderly card players had abandoned their game, and even the children's voices from the back rooms had grown quieter, as if they sensed the adult drama unfolding near the front entrance. "Look," Amelia tried again, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I understand there might be some confusion, but if you would just allow me to explain—" "Explain what?" Mitchell interrupted, throwing his hands up dramatically. "How you thought you could waltz in here and run some kind of con game. You probably saw our donation requests online and figured this would be an easy target. Well, you picked the wrong place and the wrong day." That's when Amelia noticed the phones. Several people had their devices out, and she could see the little red recording symbols on their screens. In today's world, confrontations like this rarely stayed private. She felt a mix of gratitude and concern, grateful that there would be evidence of what was happening, but concerned about how this would affect the legitimate work the center was trying to do. Mitchell must have noticed the phones too, because his behavior became even more theatrical. He seemed to be playing to an audience now, perhaps thinking that his tough stance against what he perceived as a scammer would make him look like a hero protecting the community's resources. "You want to know what really gets to me?" he said, pointing an accusatory finger at Amelia. "It's people who try to take advantage of organizations that are genuinely trying to help. Do you have any idea how hard we work to raise money for our programs? How many legitimate donors we have who sacrifice their own comfort to help families in need?" The irony of his words was almost overwhelming. Amelia was one of those donors he claimed to respect so much. She had spent the last 15 years building a foundation that had donated over $50 million to organizations exactly like this one. She had personally funded scholarships for hundreds of students, supported job training programs in 12 states, and helped build community centers in neighborhoods that banks and businesses had forgotten. But standing here in her comfortable jeans and old sweater, none of that mattered. Mitchell had decided who she was based on nothing more than her appearance and her race, and no amount of credentials or accomplishments was going to change his mind in this moment. "Sir, please," she said, trying one more time to reach some reasonable part of him. "I'm asking you as one human being to another. Just look at my identification. Look at the business card. Make one phone call. That's all I'm asking." But Mitchell was too far gone now, too committed to his narrative to back down. He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers as if they were his allies in this confrontation. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, folks," he announced. "This is the kind of person who takes resources away from families who really need them. People who come in here with sob stories and fake credentials, trying to guilt us into giving them something they haven't earned." The accusations were getting more specific and more hurtful. Amelia could feel her professional composure beginning to crack, not because she was angry, but because she was genuinely heartbroken. This was supposed to be a place of hope and community support. She had come here ready to fund programs that would change children's lives, and instead she was being publicly humiliated by the very person who should have been welcoming her. An older gentleman from the card game stood up slowly, his weathered hands gripping his walker. "Excuse me, Mr. Mitchell," he said in a voice that carried the authority of age and experience. "Maybe you should listen to what the lady is trying to tell you." But Mitchell spun around, his anger now directed at anyone who dared question his judgment. "Mr. Peterson, I appreciate your concern, but I know how to handle situations like this. I've been running this center for 8 years, and I can spot troublemakers from a mile away." The elderly man, Mr. Peterson, shook his head sadly. "Son, I've been coming to this center for 5 years now, and I've never seen you treat anyone like this. This isn't right, and you know it." Other voices began to murmur agreement. The young computer instructor stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Mitchell, maybe we should just—" "Should what?" he snapped. "Let every person who walks through that door waste our time with elaborate stories? No, absolutely not. I have a responsibility to protect this center, and the people we serve from exactly this kind of manipulation." Amelia watched this unfold with a growing sense of surreal disbelief. The man who was supposed to be serving the community was now arguing with that very community, because they were trying to defend her. The people he claimed to protect were telling him he was wrong, and he was too blinded by his prejudices to listen. That's when she noticed something that made her heart sink even further. In the corner, partially hidden behind a pillar, stood a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She was clutching a piece of paper, probably artwork from one of the children's programs, and her eyes were wide with confusion and fear. This child was witnessing an adult in a position of authority publicly humiliating another adult based on nothing more than assumptions and bias. What kind of lesson was this teaching her? What was she learning about how people should treat each other, about what it meant when adults talked about fairness and respect? Mitchell must have been running out of steam, but he seemed determined to escalate the situation rather than find a reasonable solution. "You know what?" he said, reaching for the phone on the front desk. "I'm calling security, and if they can't handle this, I'm calling the police. We don't tolerate this kind of behavior here." The threat of police involvement sent a chill through the room. Amelia knew all too well how these situations could escalate when law enforcement got involved. She also knew that her presence here was completely legitimate and legal. But that didn't always matter when prejudice was in play. "That won't be necessary," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly through the now silent lobby. "I'll leave, but I want everyone here to know that I came here today with nothing but good intentions and respect for the work this center does. I'm sorry that this situation got out of hand." She bent down slowly and picked up her business card from the floor, where Mitchell had let it drop. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the symbolism of that small gesture. As she straightened up, she looked directly at Mitchell. "I hope someday you'll understand that judging people by their appearance says more about you than it does about them," she said. Her voice was sad rather than angry, disappointed rather than hostile. "This center does important work, and the people who come here deserve better than what happened today." As she turned to leave, she could hear whispered conversations starting behind her. People were taking pictures of her business card with their phones before Mitchell could stop them. Others were already typing on their devices, probably sharing what they had witnessed on social media. The young computer instructor caught up with her just before she reached the door. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I'm so sorry about this. This isn't how we normally. Mr. Mitchell isn't usually like this. I don't know what got into him." Amelia managed a small smile. "Thank you for saying that. I can see that most of the people here are good, caring individuals. Don't let what happened today discourage you from the important work you're doing." As she pushed through the front doors and walked back toward her car, Amelia could hear Mitchell's voice still carrying on inside, now apparently arguing with his own staff members who were questioning his behavior. The irony struck her again. A man who was supposed to bring people together was now dividing his own team. She sat in her car for a few minutes before starting the engine, trying to process what had just happened. In her purse, her phone was already buzzing with notifications. News of the confrontation was spreading faster than she had expected, and she realized that this story was just beginning. Robert Mitchell was still feeling vindicated about his handling of the situation when his phone rang at exactly 4:17 p.m. He had spent the last hour trying to convince his staff that he had done the right thing, though their uncomfortable expressions suggested they weren't entirely convinced. The computer class instructor had barely spoken to him since the incident, and even Mr. Peterson had given him a look that could have frozen water when he left for the day. But Mitchell pushed those concerns aside. He had protected the center from what he was certain was a scam artist, and that's what mattered. When he saw the name Harold Bennett, board chairman, on his caller ID, he actually smiled. This would be a perfect opportunity to tell the board how he had successfully handled a difficult situation. "Hello, Harold," Mitchell said cheerfully into the phone. "Good to hear from you. I was actually hoping to talk to you about something that happened today. I had to deal with someone trying to run a con on us, but I handled it professionally and, Robert." The single word cut through Mitchell's cheerful rambling like a knife. Harold Bennett's voice was cold, controlled, and absolutely furious. "I need you to stop talking right now and listen to me very carefully." Something in the board chairman's tone made Mitchell's stomach drop. Harold Bennett was usually one of the most mild-mannered people he knew. The man had served on non-profit boards for over 20 years and rarely raised his voice about anything. This was different. "Harold, is everything okay? You sound... Robert, did you or did you not refuse to meet with Dr. Amelia Washington this afternoon?" The name hit Mitchell like a physical blow. Dr. Amelia Washington. Not just Amelia Washington, but Dr. Amelia Washington, the woman he had just humiliated and thrown out of the center. The woman whose business card he had dismissed as fake. The woman he had threatened to have arrested. Well, there was a woman who claimed to be, but she didn't look like... she wasn't dressed professionally and she seemed like she was trying to... Robert. Harold's voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it even more terrifying. I'm going to tell you exactly who you just threw out of our community center. Dr. Amelia Washington is one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the country. She graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. She has won cases before the Supreme Court. Her foundation has donated over $50 million to community organizations across the United States. Each fact hit Mitchell like a separate punch to the gut. He sank into his desk chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. But more importantly for us, Harold continued, she was there today to discuss a $2 million donation to fund our youth center expansion. $2 million, Robert, the largest single donation in our center's history. Mitchell felt like he was going to be sick. $2 million, the money they desperately needed to expand their programs, to serve more children, to hire more staff. The funding that would have secured the center's future for years to come. Harold, I had no way of knowing. She didn't look like... how was I supposed to know she was someone important? She was dressed like any other person who comes in here looking for help. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted so long that Mitchell wondered if the call had been dropped. When Harold finally spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Robert, did you just say that you judged Dr. Washington's credibility based on how she was dressed? Well, yes, but that's not... professional people dress professionally. If she had just worn a suit or carried a briefcase, none of this would have happened. Another long silence. Mitchell could hear his own heart beating in his ears. Robert, let me tell you something else about Dr. Washington. Her father was Reverend Charles Washington. Does that name mean anything to you? It did. Even Mitchell, who paid little attention to civil rights history, knew that name. Reverend Charles Washington had been one of the most influential leaders of the civil rights movement. He had organized boycotts, led marches, and spent years fighting for equality. There were schools named after him, streets named after him. A federal holiday honoring civil rights leaders always featured his photograph in the promotional materials. Oh God, Mitchell whispered. That's right, Harold said. You just humiliated the daughter of one of America's greatest civil rights leaders. You judged her based on her appearance and treated her like a criminal in a center that exists to serve people with dignity and respect. Mitchell's head was spinning. The woman he had dismissed as a potential scammer was Dr. Amelia Washington, the daughter of Reverend Charles Washington. A Harvard-educated attorney who had been ready to write the biggest check in their center's history. Harold, maybe we can fix this. Maybe if I call her and apologize, explain that there was a misunderstanding. Robert, it's too late for that. Dr. Washington's assistant called me an hour ago. Do you want to know what she said? Mitchell didn't want to know, but he also couldn't bring himself to hang up the phone. She said that Dr. Washington was heartbroken. Not angry, not indignant, heartbroken. She said Dr. Washington had been looking forward to visiting our center because she had heard such wonderful things about our programs. She had read every letter we sent, studied our budget proposals, and researched our impact in the community. She was excited to be part of something that was making a real difference. Each word felt like a weight being added to Mitchell's chest. He thought about how enthusiastic he had been when they first reached out to the Washington Foundation, how he had personally written parts of their proposal, highlighting all the good work they were doing and all the lives they were changing. But there's more, Robert. It's not just about the money we've lost, though that's devastating enough. Videos of your confrontation with Dr. Washington are already spreading on social media. I've seen 3 different angles posted in the last hour. People are sharing them with captions like, "This is what discrimination looks like and how not to run a nonprofit." Mitchell's blood ran cold. Videos. Multiple videos. He grabbed his computer and quickly searched for the center's name. The results made him feel dizzy. The first several links were all social media posts showing different parts of his confrontation with Dr. Washington. The headlines were, "Brutal. Community Center Director humiliates prominent civil rights. Attorney. Racist behavior at local nonprofit. When prejudice meets philanthropy." Harold, this is bad. This is really bad. It gets worse, Robert. I've already received calls from 3 other board members. 2 of our major donors saw the videos and called to express their concerns. The mayor's office left a message asking for an explanation. And I just got off the phone with Channel 7 News. They want to run a story tonight. Mitchell felt like the world was collapsing around him. His computer screen showed view counts in the thousands and climbing. The comment sections were filled with outrage, disappointment, and calls for his resignation. Some people were sharing information about Dr. Washington's achievements and charitable work, making his treatment of her look even worse in comparison. "What do I do, Harold? How do we fix this?" The pause before Harold answered told Mitchell everything he needed to know. "Robert, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I strongly suggest you prepare a detailed explanation for your actions today, because you're going to need one. Are you going to fire me?" "Robert, that's not my decision alone to make. But I will tell you this. What happened today goes against everything our center stands for. We exist to serve people with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their circumstances. You violated those principles in the worst possible way." After Harold hung up, Mitchell sat in his empty office as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk. The center had grown quiet around him, the cheerful sounds of children and conversation replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. He thought about Dr. Washington's face when he had dismissed her business card. He remembered the sadness in her voice when she said goodbye. Most of all, he thought about the $2 million that could have changed everything for the families they served. The programs they could have expanded, the children they could have helped, the opportunities they could have provided. All of it was gone now, destroyed by his own prejudice and narrow-mindedness in less than 30 minutes. His computer chimed with another notification. Another news outlet had picked up the story. The headlines were getting worse, and the story was spreading far beyond their local community. Dr. Washington's name was trending on social media, but not for the reasons anyone would want. Mitchell realized that he had not just failed Dr. Washington today. He had failed every person who depended on the center's services. He had failed his staff, his board, and his community. Most of all, he had failed himself and everything he claimed to believe in. The phone rang again, but this time Mitchell just let it ring. He wasn't ready to face any more consequences of his actions, not yet. But he knew that, ready or not, tomorrow would bring a reckoning that would change everything. By the next morning, Robert Mitchell's world had completely changed. He woke up to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and an email inbox so full that his phone had stopped loading new messages. The story had exploded overnight, spreading far beyond their small community and reaching national attention. The first video had been shared over 100,000 times. News outlets from 3 different states had picked up the story. Someone had created a hashtag, Dignity Matters, that was trending across multiple social media platforms. But what made Mitchell's stomach turn was seeing his own face in news photos, captured mid-shout from one of the videos, looking exactly like the kind of person he had always thought he wasn't. The emergency board meeting was set for 9 a.m., but Mitchell arrived at the center at 7:30, hoping to have some time to think and prepare. Instead, he found a small crowd gathered outside the building. Some held signs reading "Respect for All" and "Judge Character, not Appearance." Others were simply there to show support for Dr. Washington and express their disappointment with how she had been treated. Chan. Nell 7 News had set up a camera across the street. A reporter Mitchell recognized from the evening news was interviewing people from the community, asking them about their experiences at the center and their thoughts on what had happened. Most of the responses were supportive of the center's mission but critical of Mitchell's actions. "This place has helped my family so much over the years," said one woman, her young son standing beside her. "The after-school program here saved my sanity when I was working 2 jobs. But what happened yesterday? That's not who we are. That's not what this place stands for." An elderly man who Mitchell recognized as a regular volunteer shook his head sadly at the camera. "I've known Bobby Mitchell for 8 years. He's done good work here, but what he did yesterday was wrong. Plain and simple wrong. That lady came here in peace, and she deserved better." Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Staff members were trying to maintain normal operations, but Mitchell could see the strain in their faces. The computer class instructor, Jenny, barely made eye contact with him when he walked past. The maintenance worker, who usually greeted him cheerfully every morning, just nodded and kept working. Mitchell's assistant, Patricia, was fielding phone calls as fast as she could answer them. Most were from reporters wanting statements or interviews. Several were from donors expressing concern about the center's leadership. A few were from community members asking if the programs would continue to operate normally despite the controversy. "Mr. Mitchell," Patricia said when she saw him. Dr. Washington's office called. Her assistant wanted to know if you'd like to make a public statement before their press conference this afternoon. Press conference. Dr. Washington was holding a press conference. Mitchell felt another wave of nausea wash over him. The board members began arriving at 8:45 a.m. Harold Bennett looked like he had aged 5 years overnight. The other 4 board members, all community volunteers who had dedicated years to supporting the center, looked tired and deeply troubled. These were good people who had worked hard to build something positive in their neighborhood, and now they were facing the worst crisis in the center's history. The meeting started exactly at 9 a.m. in the center's small conference room. The cheerful motivational posters on the walls seemed out of place given the serious nature of their discussion. "Robert," Harold began, "before we discuss anything else, I want you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. The story has been picked up by CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. The Washington Post ran an online article about it this morning. Dr. Washington's foundation has released a statement expressing their disappointment, and several civil rights organizations have issued responses supporting her. Board member Linda Rodriguez, who had helped start the center's food pantry program, spoke next. "Robert, I watched the videos last night. I've watched them multiple times, trying to understand how this could have happened. What I saw was not the man I thought I knew. What I saw was someone who made assumptions about another human being based solely on her appearance and race." Mitchell started to speak, but Harold held up his hand. "We need to let you know about the immediate consequences," Harold continued. "3 of our regular donors have suspended their contributions pending a resolution to this situation. The City Council has called for a review of our community grants. The United Way is reassessing their relationship with us. And obviously the Washington Foundation donation is off the table." The financial implications were staggering. Between the lost donation and the suspended funding, they were looking at a potential loss of over $3 million. Programs would have to be cut. Staff might have to be laid off. The expansion plans were completely dead. Board member David Chen, who rarely spoke during meetings, cleared his throat. "Robert, I need to ask you directly. Do you understand that your actions yesterday were racially motivated?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mitchell had been dreading this moment when he would have to confront the ugly truth about his own behavior. I don't think I'm a racist person," Mitchell said slowly. "I've worked in community service for my entire career. I've helped people of all backgrounds. The programs here serve everyone equally. But," Linda prompted, "but when I saw Dr. Washington, I did make assumptions. I saw a black woman in casual clothes, and I assumed she was there for assistance rather than to provide it. I judged her based on stereotypes that I didn't even realize I was carrying." The admission felt like pulling a knife out of his own chest. "Painful, but also somehow necessary." Harold nodded grimly. "At least you can acknowledge that. The question now is what we do about it." Board member Angela Foster, the newest member, had been quiet until now. "I have to ask, can we recover from this? Even if we handle everything perfectly from this point forward, can we regain the community's trust?" It was a fair question. The videos had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The story had reached national news. Dr. Washington was a respected public figure with a platform and influence. This wasn't the kind of mistake that could be quietly swept under the rug. "There's something else," Harold said. "Dr. Washington is holding a press conference at 2 p.m. today. Her office reached out to us, giving us the opportunity to make a statement or send a representative. They're not required to do that. They're doing it as a courtesy." Mitchell felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. "What kind of statement are they looking for?" "I think," Linda said carefully, "they're giving us a chance to do the right thing before they proceed with whatever they're planning to announce." The room fell quiet as everyone absorbed the implications. Dr. Washington held all the cards now. She could destroy the center's reputation completely if she wanted to. She could use her platform to ensure that Mitchell never worked in community service again. She could make sure that their funding dried up permanently, but she was giving them a chance to respond first. Even after everything that had happened, she was showing them more consideration than Mitchell had shown her. "What do you think we should do?" Mitchell asked quietly. Harold looked around the table at his fellow board members. "I think we need to make some difficult decisions. And we need to make them now, before that press conference." The next hour was the most difficult of Mitchell's professional life. They discussed resignation, termination, public apologies, and damage control strategies. They talked about the center's mission and whether Mitchell's continued presence would compromise their ability to serve the community effectively. Throughout it all, Mitchell kept thinking about Dr. Washington's face when she had picked up her business card from the floor, the dignity she had maintained even as he humiliated her, the sadness in her voice when she said goodbye. By 11 a.m. they had reached a decision. It wasn't easy and it wasn't pleasant, but it was necessary. Mitchell would resign immediately. The board would issue a public apology taking full responsibility for his actions. They would announce new policies and training programs designed to ensure that something like this never happened again. But even as they made these plans, everyone in the room knew that the real test would come at 2 p.m., when Dr. Washington faced the cameras and told the world what she planned to do next. The center's future, and the futures of the hundreds of families who depended on their services, hung in the balance. As Mitchell cleaned out his desk that afternoon, he could hear the sound of cars pulling up outside. The press conference was about to begin, and Dr. Washington was about to speak. Whatever she said would determine whether the Riverside Community Center could survive the damage he had caused. Dr. Amelia Washington stood behind the podium at the downtown community center, looking out at a room packed with reporters, community members, and activists. The cameras were rolling, microphones were extended toward her, and the whole country seemed to be waiting to hear what she would say. This was her moment to seek justice, to demand accountability, to use her platform and influence to ensure that what happened to her never happened to anyone else. But as she looked out at the faces in the crowd, Amelia thought about her father. Reverend Charles Washington had always taught her that true change came not from revenge, but from understanding. Not from tearing people down, but from building them back up. Not from ending conversations, but from starting them. "Thank you all for being here today," Amelia began, her voice calm and clear. 2 days ago, I visited the Riverside Community Center with the intention of discussing a significant donation to support their youth programs. What happened instead has sparked a national conversation about dignity, respect, and the assumptions we make about each other based on appearance. She paused, looking directly into the main camera. "I want to be clear about something from the start. What Robert Mitchell did to me was wrong. His behavior was unacceptable and it caused real harm. But I did not come here today to destroy anyone or anything. I came here to talk about how we can do better." The room was completely silent. This was not what anyone had expected. The Riverside Community Center serves over 300 families in one of our city's ME, underserved neighborhoods. They provide after-school programs that keep children safe and engaged. They offer job training that helps adults build better futures for their families. They run a food pantry that ensures no one in their community goes hungry. Amelia's voice grew stronger as she spoke about the center's work. These programs are vital. The families who depend on them should not suffer because of one person's poor judgment. That's why I'm announcing today that the Washington Foundation will be moving forward with our planned donation. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Several reporters exchanged confused glances. "However," Amelia continued, "this donation comes with conditions. The center's board has already taken steps to address what happened. Mr. Mitchell has resigned from his position, and they have committed to implementing comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all staff and volunteers." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "But we're going to go further than that. The Washington Foundation is donating $3 million, not $2 million as originally planned, to establish the Charles Washington Memorial Program for Community Justice." The amount drew audible gasps from the audience. Amelia smiled slightly, thinking her father would have appreciated the dramatic effect. "This program will have 3 components. First, it will fund the youth center expansion that was originally proposed, ensuring that children in this community have safe spaces to learn and grow. Second, it will establish a training institute that will help community organizations across the country develop better practices for inclusive service delivery." She paused again, making sure everyone understood the significance of what she was saying. "And third, it will create a community advisory board with diverse representation to provide ongoing oversight and guidance for the center's operations. Because real change doesn't happen with one training session or one policy change. It happens when we fundamentally change how organizations think about and engage with the communities they serve." An older woman in the front row raised her hand. Amelia recognized her as someone who had been at the center during the confrontation. "Dr. Washington, why are you still willing to help after what happened to you?" It was the question everyone wanted answered. "Because punishment alone doesn't create change," Amelia replied. "My father used to say that you can't hate someone into being better. You can't shame them into growth. Real transformation happens when people understand not just that they were wrong, but why they were wrong, and when they're given tools and opportunities to do better." She looked out at the cameras again. "What happened to me at the Riverside Community Center happens to people every day. In stores, in offices, in schools, in hospitals. People make assumptions based on how someone looks, how they're dressed, what they think they know about them. And those assumptions cause real harm." The room was completely quiet now, everyone hanging on her words. "But here's what I've learned in my years as a civil rights attorney. Lasting change doesn't come from destroying the people who make those mistakes. It comes from helping them, and the institutions they represent become better. It comes from creating systems that prevent those mistakes from happening again." After the press conference, Amelia stayed to answer individual questions from reporters. But what moved her most were the conversations with community members who had come to show their support. The elderly man who had spoken up for her at the center approached with tears in his eyes. "Dr. Washington, I want you to know that what you did today, choosing grace over revenge, that's the kind of leadership this world needs more of." The young computer instructor from the center was there too, looking nervous but determined. "Dr. Washington, I want to apologize for not doing more to stop what happened. I was shocked and I didn't know what to do, but that's not an excuse." Amelia shook her head. "You have nothing to apologize for. What matters now is how we move forward together." 3 months later, the transformation at the Riverside Community Center was remarkable. The new director, chosen through a nationwide search led by the Community Advisory Board, was a dynamic leader with a deep commitment to inclusive service. The diversity training program had become a model that other organizations were asking to replicate. But perhaps the most surprising development was Robert Mitchell himself. After losing his job and facing weeks of public criticism, Mitchell had reached out to Dr. Washington through her foundation. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to make excuses. He simply asked if there was any way he could learn from what had happened and make amends through action rather than words. That conversation led to Mitchell volunteering at a homeless shelter downtown, where he worked directly with individuals experiencing housing insecurity. Many of them were people of color who had faced discrimination throughout their lives. Listening to their stories, understanding their struggles, and seeing their dignity despite their circumstances began to change something fundamental in Mitchell's worldview. He attended every session of the diversity training program, not because he had to, but because he wanted to understand how his unconscious biases had shaped his actions. He read books about racial justice, attended community forums, and began to see the world through different eyes. 6 months after the incident, Mitchell asked to meet with Dr. Washington in person. They sat in her office on a quiet Saturday afternoon, and for the first time, he was able to offer an apology that came from genuine understanding rather than self-preservation. "Dr. Washington, I've spent the last 6 months trying to understand how I could have treated you the way I did," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I've learned that my actions weren't just about you. They were about assumptions and prejudices I'd been carrying my whole life without even realizing it." Amelia listened carefully. She'd seen many apologies over the years, some genuine, some calculated. This one felt different. "What have you learned?" she asked simply. "I learned that dignity isn't something people have to earn based on their appearance or their circumstances. I learned that respect should be the default, not something that has to be proven. And I learned that my job was never to decide who deserved help. It was to provide help to whoever needed it." They talked for over an hour. Mitchell told her about his work at the homeless shelter, about the people he had met and the stories he had heard. He talked about the training programs he had completed and the books he had read. Most importantly, he talked about how he was trying to raise his own children differently, teaching them to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes. When their conversation ended, Dr. Washington made an unexpected offer. Robert, the Charles Washington Memorial Program needs community liaisons, people who can work directly with organizations to help them implement inclusive practices. The work requires someone who understands both the harm that bias can cause and the possibility for growth and change. Would you be interested? It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something more powerful, a chance for redemption through service. A year later, the Riverside Community Center was thriving. The youth center expansion was complete, serving twice as many children as before. The Training Institute had worked with over 50 organizations across 3 states. Most importantly, the center had become a model for how institutions could acknowledge their mistakes, learn from them, and emerge stronger and more inclusive. Dr. Washington visited the center on the anniversary of the original incident. She was welcomed not as a donor or a victim, but as a partner in the ongoing work of building a more just community. The walls were covered with photos of children in the new programs, thank you letters from families, and certificates recognizing the center's achievements in community service. In the lobby, where the confrontation had taken place a year earlier, there was now a plaque. It read, "The Charles Washington Memorial Program, dedicated to the principle that every person who enters here deserves dignity, respect, and the opportunity to be seen for who they truly are." As Amelia read those words, she thought about her father and the legacy he had left behind. Not a legacy of anger or resentment, but one of hope and transformation. Not a legacy of tearing down, but of building up. Not a legacy of ending conversations, but of starting them. The little girl who had witnessed the original confrontation was there that day too, now participating in the after-school program. She approached Dr. Washington shyly, carrying a piece of artwork. "I made this for you," she said, holding out a colorful drawing of people of all different colors, holding hands around a building that looked like the community center. At the top, in carefully printed letters, she had written, "Everyone belongs here." Dr. Washington accepted the drawing with a smile that her father would have recognized. Not the smile of someone who had won a victory, but the smile of someone who had helped plant seeds for a better future. Change, she reflected, didn't always come from the courtroom or the headlines. Sometimes it came from having the courage to see past hurt to possibility, from choosing growth over punishment, from believing that people could become better than their worst moments. The Riverside Community Center had learned that lesson, and in doing so had become something more than just a place that served the community. It had become a place that showed what the community could be at its best, inclusive, forgiving, and always reaching toward a more perfect version of justice.